Last week I talked about a spiritual problem that has been sweeping our land like a pandemic disease, and it's caused from a severely distorted image of God. Unfortunately, the images that most of us have grown up with are images that are used to control our personal behavior rather than transform our spiritual perspectives. One such image is that of God as a divine police officer. Those who share this sort of image are always on their best behavior because one never knows where God might be lurking. If you speed down the highway of life, ignoring the spiritual warning signs that are posted along the way, then you can be sure that sooner or later, God's going to stop you one day and issue a citation. Your punishment may only be a stiff penalty, such as the loss of your job or your health. But if you persist in breaking God's laws, which are numerous and detailed, you will eventually find yourself sentenced to life imprisonment, otherwise known as hell. Another image of God is that of one with a severe bipolar disorder. At one point, God tells humankind to be fruitful and multiply, and the next thing we know, God decides to wipe out most of humanity with a great flood. On one hand, God is bragging about the good and faithful Job, and then God turns around and allows Satan to afflict this righteous servant with all kinds of horrible things. This is a frightening sort of God to worship, because one never knows what mood God will be in. Will God be gracious and forgiving today, or will God zap me for my misbehavior? We see both images throughout the Bible, and if they belong to the same deity, then we surely wish someone would prescribe for God a divine dose of medication which will help with this disorder. And yet another image is that of God as the fairy godparent. With this image, God wields a magic wand, ready and waiting to wave it over our miserable lives, so that everything will be changed for the better. All we have to do is have enough faith, or pray enough, or belong to the right religion, or put enough money in the offering basket, or any combination of these things. And when the magic wand is eventually waved over our heads, our true love will walk into our lives without us ever having made ourselves vulnerable or taken a single emotional risk. With the touch of God's wand, our diabetes is healed without ever changing our diet or exercise habits. And we never have to worry about stroke, heart disease, or cancer, regardless of how many cigarettes we smoke. And just so you know, I've heard several preachers point out how God's magic wand also seems to be pretty handy for taking care of credit card debt. All of these images of God are warped and distorted. They are images created by the religious right, including but not limited to the Christian religious right. Images which are used to manipulate the behavior of the common layperson. Fear of eternal damnation is a powerful weapon which has been used for centuries to control the masses, a way of keeping the pews filled and the offering baskets overflowing. Fear of not having enough leads to an attitude of greedy miserliness, thinly disguised as prosperity theology. And fear of other people is the root cause of bigotry, racism, and religious fanaticism, which has historically justified global war. These fearful, distorted images of God are nothing more than manipulative tactics. They are in fact childish approaches to spirituality, immature images of God in which you and I are not accountable for our own behavior. St. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthian church, said, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. And he continues by saying, and now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love. If we can somehow put aside our childish images of God, if we can recognize they are nothing more than authoritarian images of fear which have been used to manipulate our emotions and behavior, and if we can replace these images with a more accurate image of a gracious and loving God, we will find that not only is the yoke an easy one and the burden light, as Jesus promised, but our whole perspective and outlook on life will be transformed. When we understand that God is loving and gracious rather than punishing and vengeful, then something good happens to us and through us. This morning's text says that we will inherit the dominion that God has prepared for us from the foundation of the world. Now, many people read that as meaning we will go to heaven if we do good deeds and behave ourselves. But I see it very differently. In Luke's gospel, Jesus says people won't be able to say, here it is or there it is, when speaking of the dominion of God, because in fact, the dominion of God is already within you. So if that's the case, this morning's dominion, which God has prepared for us and is just waiting to be inherited, in fact has the potential of being experienced right here, right now. We don't feed the hungry or give drink to the thirsty in order to earn merit badges that entitle us to a place in heaven after we die. Welcoming the stranger and clothing the naked aren't seen as spiritual fire insurance. But instead, we live in the moment. As we address the needs of others, we experience a release from our prisons of selfishness and self-centeredness. Fear and resentment of other people is replaced with compassion. In short, we experience the dominion of God which has been prepared for us. When we look into the face of another person, we see the face of God. When Jesus said, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me, he was talking about no longer seeing another person as the other. In God's dominion, there is no other. We are all connected. We all belong to the same family. When we worship a gracious God, a God who is patient with us, then we also are gracious and patient with each other. We become instruments of God's grace. Forgiveness becomes a way of life, not the exception. When we see God as loving and gracious, we understand that each of us, every single one of us, sometimes exhibits the sheep-like qualities of this morning's text when we are able to show compassion. And each of us, every single one of us, sometimes exhibits the goat-like qualities of this morning's text when we walk past the person who is in need. And if we worship God as the divine police officer, we will always live in danger of eternal punishment and damnation, no matter what our behavior may be, because sooner or later, we're bound to slip up. And if we worship a bipolar deity, then we can only hope that God is in a good mood when our sentence is pronounced on the final day of judgment. If we worship a cosmic fairy godparent, then we don't have to worry about our neighbor at all. God will take care of it with just a wave of a magic wand. But if we worship a loving God, then we don't concern ourselves so much with our afterlife as we do with the needs of our neighbor within this moment. We embody the love which we have received and we share it with others. We see the face of God and goodness in other people and find ourselves tending more to embrace others than we protect ourselves. If we can heal our image of God, then the prognosis is a good one. Meister Eckhart put it this way: the seed of God is in us. Now the seed of a pear tree grows into a pear, and a hazel seed grows into a hazel tree. A seed of God grows into God. We become like the God we worship. If we worship a vindictive, judgmental God, then we add fuel to the fire of fear and hatred that is sweeping the land. But if we worship a God of love, then we evolve into loving people. We embody God's love, and we become healing agents in a broken world. May each of us embrace God as a God of love, and may we experience the personal freedom that comes with that love. May we embrace a God of grace, and may we embody that grace, answering our call to transform and recreate the world into God's dominion on earth. Amen.